Welcome to Stepping Out with Sheriff Mike Chapman.
Hi, I'm Sheriff Mike Chapman, and welcome to another episode of Stepping Out. We're here. I'm very pleased to be here with Sharon Virts. Sharon has a long history in this community here. She's been very, very active in just so many things here. She's a successful businesswoman. She's an author. Her knowledge, her historic knowledge of this county is just absolutely amazing. So we're so happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Mike. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, we're so happy that you could make it here. So I want to go into a couple things here, and I know you got a long history here. So I want to first start off with the business that you established here. FCI when you did that with the federal government. So tell us a little bit about that and what it did, and then I want to take it from there. I want to go from there into some of these other things that you've done here in the community, and then also into these great books that you've written here. So tell us a little bit about yourself here with that.
So the company, I started my company in my brother's basement in 1991 when I was under the age of 30. We'll just leave it at that. I don't want to put too much on that time frame. But first we were sort of a consulting firm, but I built it into a government contracting company, and we ran more or less this country's immigration system. We had a lot of contracts with. We did adjudication support, which is that back office work.
Okay.
So we ran all the visa processing for the Department of State at the New Hampshire Center and at the Kentucky Consulate Center. We ran the service centers for processing visas for USCIS, records management for ICE, background investigations for the FBI up in Winchester. So when I sold it in 2017, we had about 5,000 employees, 127 offices nationwide. So a little bit about immigration, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I would say it sounds like a very complex operation. You hit it from all different angles there.
Right, but we also did the adjudication support, program support services for the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia.
Okay.
Had that contract for like 22 years, so a long time.
Okay.
And then we also did the work at the Coast Guard, all the Merchant Mariner credentialing programs.
Wow.
So we had a lot of that kind of back office support. So sold that in 2017 and been here working in the county, trying to figure out my next career ever since.
No, well, you've got a lot going on. So obviously a very deep understanding of the federal government, how that works and how that impacts us here, not just locally here, but regionally and nationally here. So that's really important to know, and that kind of background here. And so I saw that you have, so you're very involved with the community here, and thankfully you are. We like to, it's great to have people that really take their time and invest in the community here, and you have here. So tell us about this, the heart of it, this foundation that you have. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've done here within the community to try to make the Loudoun County a better place.
Well, I grew up here. My family's been here since the 1750s, at least that one line, a long time. And, I grew up in a house. We didn't have running water for a while and had a dirt floor in the back part of the house. Wow. And so, and it was this community and the education system here and the people and the leaders that were my mentors that helped develop my life and my career. I think we have to put back. I've got to, help others, get ahead in this world. And so in 2015, I decided to come up with my own foundation, family foundation. And we have invested tremendously in the community. We helped the Inova Hospital build a trauma center. I don't know if you know that, but until we did this in 2016, 2017, we didn't have a trauma center here in Loudoun County.
I know. I was actually at the grand opening of that. I remember seeing that. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
So now we have a level 2 trauma center, so we can, minutes matter, so we want to make sure that people have good health care available to them through the Inova system. We also, do a lot of historical preservation work. We rebuilt the Selma House. We have a number of projects in in downtown Leesburg that we're working on now. I'm the chairman of the Loudoun Museum. Really believe in preserving our history. Again, my family's been here a long time, and I think that history is really important to our culture. A lot of education initiatives. My husband's involved with. We donated an art facility and a music lab for Luckett Elementary School through the Loudoun Education Foundation here. He's on the board. He was the board of the Loudoun Education Foundation for a long, long time. Shenandoah University. Okay. A lot of education initiatives. And then we give grants out every year. Last year we gave out $50,000. The year before that, $100,000. Wow. So we have a competitive grant cycle that we give out every year. So people will be announcing those grant opportunities here soon on our website. So folks, if you've got a nonprofit that you fit within the things that we care about, we certainly would invite them to submit their applications.
So tell us about the Selma Mansion. Okay, because I know, because I saw like before and after pictures
It was
of
a
that.
hot mess.
I
Is what
know.
it was.
Well, I know my son went to Loudoun County High School, and he used to
And so did
say,
I.
yeah, so he used to say like there before, they would go out there and it was like
Be a party. Oh,
like a
yeah.
haunted house,
Oh, it was.
and so to see it now, I mean, it's just unbelievable. I've been out there, and I tell you, you've just done an incredible job with
Yeah,
it.
it was falling down. I mean, it was a hot mess. And a friend of mine from college, had put it on her Facebook page. Does anybody know what this is? This place is. And I looked at it, and it looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. And then when she said it was Selma, I'm like, oh my goodness! I grew up not 2-3 miles from there, out in Luckett's, and I said I got to save it. I have to do it. And so I told my husband, I said, we're going to go do this. And he said, we're going to go do what? So it was right after that snowstorm in 2016 that we
Right.
had like 3 feet of snow.
Yeah.
We drove out there, got stuck, walked the rest of the way.
Okay.
We had permission from the owners or the owner to go inside, so we did. And my husband just said, you're insane. We're not doing this. And it just spoke to me, though. I was like, I have to. It needed help. It needed love. It was just so sad. And so the deal was that if a structural engineer were to deem it sound, foundation sound, that we would buy it or try to buy it because it wasn't for sale. That was a whole nother story, and fix it up. And so I just happen to know a few structural engineers I'm friends with that said it was perfectly sound. And I told my husband at the time, I said, just some wire brush and some paint and it'll be good. And God knows how much money later before we finished it. But no, we live there, and the house is so rich with history. I don't know if you know this, but it was built by Armistead Mason, who was a general, a colonel at the time, but a general in the War of 1812. And he was stationed down in Norfolk and was responsible for keeping those British troops from taking the city of Norfolk way back when in the War of 1812. Quite the hero, but also quite the narcissist and thin-skinned guy. And so when I started writing my first book about him and the duel he fought with his brother-in-law and his cousin, who were all descendants of George Mason IV, I thought he would be my hero, but then I found out that I kind of liked his brother-in-law and cousin a lot better, who actually ended up Tuscarora Mill.
Wow.
Jack McCarty is the one that's responsible for the
Oh,
building
wow.
of that eventually, the first rendition of it in 1837, long after the duel. But yeah.
So yeah, it's an amazing house, and I know the other projects. So you're involved in some other projects here within the county. So tell us a little bit about some of those here.
Well, we have right now a historical preservation projects. We have 2 houses downtown, 204 and 208 North King Street. They were owned by Billy Whitmore, and the Whitmore family had owned them since they came here in the 1830s. And so it's been a process to restore those and bring those back to life. We also restored what was the old Lynch House, which is now the Eliza House. And we've got another property out in out in Taylorstown that we're working on. And I got my eye on another one downtown, but I'm not going to reveal what that one is. But yeah, just trying to save these old places because they all have history and they all have stories to tell. And I just think it's the right thing to do.
So we had a long conversation, I know, before this interview here, and I know your knowledge, your historical knowledge of what this county is all about. And actually, when we started talking about the sheriffs here, it was amazing to me because I mean I have some basic knowledge of what, because I grew up in Maryland, so I was familiar with this area, and I know like when I was growing up in Maryland, I would always see that when we had snowfalls, it was like we would always be the last to get notified in Montgomery County, Maryland, where I was at, if we were going to go to school or not. But first, right out of the bat was Loudoun County. They were like, schools closed, schools closed. So as a kid, you're like, oh, wow, they got their schools are
Have
closed.
you seen the roads in Western Loudoun?
Well, I know.
When I grew up.
But I mean, so
you could count the
yes.
cars on Route 15 when I grew up.
Well, I know. So it was a country back then, but I tell you, when I look at the growth of this county, it's just unbelievable here. But and where it was and where it's gone to now, But I look at talking with you about, we get into your books in a second, but just the historical knowledge you had of like the sheriffs, and I know, the first sheriff, it was like 1757. I remember that basically was a tax collector. His name was Campbell. But then when you go through the history of sheriffs here, so tell us about what you know about the way this county developed and the way it was protected over the years.
Yeah,
here.
it's interesting. So I sort of got into it when my first book, Little John, I guess, was the sheriff, and the men were threatening to duel each other, and so he filed charges against them. But that was not really how I really got into it. But in 1824, so my second book comes out on June 23rd. So it's tomorrow.
So what's the name of your first book?
First book's Masque of Honor.
Okay.
And it's the first of a series that my publisher has signed a 5-book deal with me to publish all 5 of these. But the first one was Masque of Honor, but the second one is coming out. Second one in this series.
Right.
It's my 4th book, but it's the second one in this series. It's called Bargains of Fate. So there's a lot that goes on in that story, but the crux of it is that how I sort of found it was a guy named Dennis McCarty, who was a pretty well-off farmer down in Aldi, got drunk at a turkey shoot on Christmas Day and literally stabbed and killed his brother-in-law at a turkey shoot, after a turkey shoot. And he absconded, of course. He fled into Maryland. And at the time, the sheriff was basically just an executive of the court. His name was John Rose, and every sheriff pretty much up into the Civil War, they were lawyers. They had 2-year terms. They served primarily as tax collectors. They had the big sheriff's sales.
Well, I'm glad I don't have to do that.
Right? You were the tax collector. They were the jailer. They had a jailer that worked for them. But they really weren't a law enforcement officer. They were an officer of the court. They used to call it the county court oligarchy in Virginia before the Civil War. Anyway, John Rose, he organizes a posse comitatus, which is the power of the community, a posse.
Right.
And they go off and they go to find this guy, and they go into Maryland because they hear he's over there. No calling somebody saying, "Hey, can we come over and get the guy?" And they just right across the river. They capture him in Poolsville and they haul him back. And I was fascinated by that. I mean, no extradition, no working with other agencies. No, we're just going to get our boys. We're going to deputize him. Y'all go find him, hunt him down, and bring him back. And that's kind of how it was done up until about the Civil War, of course. They were all lawyers, officers of the court, and it was a good old boys network. It was all the they were elected by the people, but they had to be first approved by the court.
Right.
And the judges on the court, or the justice of the peace, or they were called the magistrates in some cases, but they were appointed by the governor of Virginia. So it was all extremely political, all among a certain class of people. It was like a who knows who.
Right.
And I mean, when I saw Loudoun Lee was sheriff from 1825 to 1827, Loudoun Lee had served in the Revolution under, he was aide de camp to Marquis Lafayette. And this man had to be 70 years old. And he's serving as sheriff. Well, 70 years old in 1825 is old. I know it doesn't seem old to you and I today, because the closer we get to that number, it's not as much. But I mean, so he clearly wasn't, running around with a gun on his hip and with a badge. He was just an officer of the court. But in 1870, after the Civil War, the new Constitution of Virginia was passed, and it was pretty much, they called it the Underwood Constitution. John Curtis Underwood was a jurist from New York that Lincoln had appointed before he was assassinated, and he ended up being in charge of the state of Virginia, coming up with a new constitution. And so that constitution came up with these things called constitutional officers: the sheriff, the commissioner of revenue, the clerk of the court, all those.
That goes back to 1870.
1870.
Wow.
Elected officials.
Okay.
And so that's when the first real sheriff, if you will, in terms of what we think of a sheriff, was elected. Right. And again, these were more law enforcement officers. Right. And how it worked. And so James Carruthers is the one I kind of jump in on. He was elected in 1879. And he was the treasurer before. He was a sheriff. So he was a treasurer, and then he becomes the sheriff because he had been the deputy to the sheriff beforehand. So from 1879 forward, until to very recently, every one of the sheriffs that we had was a deputy of the previous sheriff. Now, sometimes it was because the sheriff just decided he wasn't going to run for re-election. Other times it was because the deputy had enough of whatever the sheriff was doing and decided to run against him. But you would see in elections, you'd see them running against a game warden, or you'd see them running against another treasurer, or you see them running against these people that really, none of them were law enforcement officers. So one of them, for example, I recall, was a dentist before he was sheriff. Another one was a druggist. Thomas Edwards was the druggist. He was sheriff between 1908 and
So
1923.
was the sheriff at the time a part-time job, or was it
As a part-time job.
Okay.
They were all just sort of part-time jobs. And the deputies were just appointed by that sheriff to basically the police of the law out in another district, out in Aldie or, out in Middleburg or out in, Sterling, or they really weren't,
Right.
there was only 3 of them usually. There weren't that many of them.
Right. Right.
But they were basically part-time guys who had no law enforcement training other than being the deputy before they became sheriff. And there were some really interesting sheriffs. You want to talk about some interesting sheriffs I've sort of come up with as I've done my research. One was probably the worst sheriff we've ever had, in my opinion, was Harry Russell.
Okay.
He was the deputy sheriff under Sheriff Carruthers in 1882 when that first lynching happened of Paige Wallace up along the Potomac. And then he became deputy in 1887 and was basically became sheriff in 1887 and then was sheriff until 1903.
Right.
And he was the sheriff during all 3 of our documented lynching cases in the county. And he was the one that was overtaken when Charles Craven was lynched in 1902 by the mob of 300-400 people that overtook the jail, took them all over. And when Edwin Garrett was prosecuting the lynch mob that summer, he got Russell on the stand, and Russell said, "I couldn't recognize a soul, not a soul." And the guy that was leading the lynch mob happened to be Charlie Lombach, who was one of the most respected businessmen in Leesburg, and ended up being mayor of Leesburg in 1917. So for him to say he had no idea who he was, very well. And interestingly enough, not shortly after he left office, he blew his brains out.
Wow.
He committed suicide.
Wow. So I saw. So I happened to go to the Juneteenth celebration here recently, and they have the site there where dedicated to Orion Anderson.
Yeah, that poor boy.
Who was hung back then, and I guess Russell was a sheriff at.
He was the sheriff then.
Yeah.
Did nothing.
Yeah.
No, and the prosecutor was not. It was not Edwin Garrett. It was McCabe.
Right.
Jim McCabe, who did nothing either in terms of prosecution. And same thing with J.W. Foster was a prosecutor when Wallace Page was Page Wallace when he was lynched and did nothing.
Wow.
So it was only Edwin Garrett that stood up, and he was ostracized, and it was really tough for him and Charlie Harrison, who was the magistrate at the time.
Wow.
They went after him pretty hard.
Well, if you look at a lot of sheriffs' offices throughout the Commonwealth and throughout the country, quite frankly, many of the people that become sheriffs are actually the deputies or chief deputy, under sheriff, and it kind of goes that way. I would say that Loudoun, when I ran, it was kind of a flip around on that, because I was the interloper. I came in from the outside, and sometimes that's needed to kind of change a culture.
I call it the apprenticeship model, and it over 100 years, Mike. It has been going on over 100 years of this. The deputy takes over from the sheriff, and that culture sort of just remains. You had some good sheriffs in there. I can name a couple. I really like Eugene Adrian. He was the first one that had to really work at, working with the FBI, and he had a nationwide manhunt. It was during the George Crawford case in 1931. Agnes Eiley out in Middleburg, Upperville area, was killed. And her maid was killed also. And this manhunt for George Crawford began, and years before they were able to extradite him from Massachusetts and bring him back. And that's the one that ended up with Charles Houston, who ended up, being the first NAACP black man to try a case here. He was the one that presided over that case. The courthouse is named after Charles Houston now. But Aiden was the sheriff at the time, and he had his hands full with trying to coordinate a manhunt, a nationwide manhunt for this guy, and trying to bring him back, and he really working with modern technology, trying to do the forensics and trying to figure out if it was his DNA, not his DNA, but his fingerprints, and whether it was his skin that was under their nails and all that kind of stuff. It was relatively new in 1931, 1932. Yeah. So he was an interesting guy. And then I think he was sheriff for 16 years. Wow. He left in 1939. My favorite sheriff, of course, is Roger Powell. I don't know did you know about Roger Powell?
So I'm not your favorite sheriff?
No, well, before you, Mike. I walked right into that one. No, but before you, my favorite old dead sheriff. How about that? This guy was such a good old boy. Yesterday was Father's Day, right? And I was talking to my dad, and I told him I was going to come on here and do this for you. And my dad's, oh, I knew Roger Powell. And then I get all the Roger Powell stories you can possibly imagine. And Roger Powell was the kind of guy that if you showed up in his town and you look kind of suspect, he'd approach you and he'd say, boy, or what are you doing in my town?
Right.
And what are you here for?
Okay.
Well, I think you'd be moseying on out the way you moseyed on in. Here's a bus ticket or a train ticket. Now get yourself gone, or you're going to be spending the night at my house.
Yeah.
He was that kind of a sheriff.
Really?
So Dad was telling me a story about there were two young men, boys. If you're under the age of 30,
Right.
back then you were called boy, I think. I don't know.
Right.
But there were two young men who were both in a rivalry for some young lady. And one of them ends up missing, and they find him dead.
Uh-huh.
And Roger, of course, he goes off and he arrests the other young man, and he won't confess to doing anything wrong. And so they get the girl, and they take her to the grave. He takes her to the grave site where the young man was buried,
Uh-huh.
and told her that he was going to be raising his hand from the grave, waving at her every time she walked by if she didn't confess as to what she knew. And she said, well, he's not going to rise up. He's under 6 feet of dirt. He goes, well, he'll be rising up in your dreams at night, so you better tell me what's going on. And he coerced her into confessing to what she knew and her involvement in it right there at the gravesite, according to my father. So, and he left office, I think, in 1959.
Wow.
So an interesting time of sheriffs. But the model changed. We went from this very selective, closed community way of policing before the war, and then after 1870 to this apprenticeship model where you just had this sort of incestuous chain of sheriffs that just, they were part-time positions, and it really, if you didn't know if you knew the sheriff, you were in a good way. If you didn't know the sheriff, you'd find yourself in a lot of trouble.
It's a particular culture,
Yeah.
and that's something when I came in, not to go too far back in history, but it's a cultural thing, and to come in and try to introduce, especially in a county like this that's grown so much. I mean, just past coming in here, we have a real-time operations center now, real-time crime center. We're flying drones around. So you talk about the technology, back in the 30s. I mean, you're talking about fingerprints and that kind of
Powell
stuff.
brought radios in. Arthur Godfrey donated the radios,
Okay.
and he didn't want to tell anybody where he got them from. And he installed the first radio system, courtesy of Arthur Godfrey,
Okay.
and that was in the 50s. So they didn't have radios until then. So they were really kind of, policing changed also because, in the old days, it was as far as you could run or as far as a horse could travel.
Right.
That's how
Right.
far it would take you to get away. But now we had trains, and we had
Right.
then we brought in automobiles, and so then crime became more
Right.
widespread. You could. There was a case,
Yeah.
I think, it was during the Dwyer. A guy named Max Dwyer was sheriff from like 1960 to 64, 59 to 63, or somewhere in there. And two guys from North Carolina, they had committed something like 187 robberies, break-ins.
Uh-huh.
A guy named Howard and a guy named Durham, and they had killed a number of people in doing so. Well, we had out in Purcellville a wealthy landowner, businessman, was killed, was stabbed during a break-in, and his housekeeper, her throat was slashed, but she lived through it, so she could identify them. And he actually lost office because they couldn't find the men because they fled back to North Carolina. And ultimately, Bob Lagarde, when he was sheriff in the 60s, him and Harrison found them, or was able to get to where they were incarcerated, and did an identification and brought them to justice, or at least they were brought to justice. But it was a huge case because they didn't have that capability of communication,
Right.
of being able to confer with other jurisdictions. It was a thing, and we were in the dark ages here because we had this sort of good old boy network of how we did policing
Sure.
up until not too long ago.
Yeah.
Am
So
I-
my dad was a retired DC detective, and when I was growing up, and we talk about people running away, and he said, "You can't outrun a radio."
That's
you know?
right.
And
That's right.
Yeah, so it's come a long way, but I look at now the things that we're doing and how much this county has changed. I mean, the population, I think when I took office was probably, so we're about 450 now, a little bit more than 450,000. I think it's probably about 325,000 or so. In the county, I mean, it's just growing like crazy. I was riding around just yesterday, and I'm looking at all this building that's going up, all these data center, all this other kind of
Crazy, isn't
stuff.
it?
It's a lot, so much going on.
Well, what's interesting is that in 1830, Guess what the biggest town was in Loudoun County?
I don't know.
Waterford,
Waterford. Wow.
because they were along the main road.
Oh yeah.
And then
yeah.
when the railroad opened up in the 1830s, people began to move. They didn't need that road to go through Waterford.
Okay, so it was
so
probably
they-
Percival and
yeah,
Leesburg, and
exactly. The railroad is what changed things.
Yeah.
Interesting, huh? So
Yeah.
we could be sitting in Waterford instead of as a county seat if we didn't have that rail line. It's interesting how transportation really changed things. Of course, then the telegraph, the communications also
Sure.
did a lot to do that.
It's
those
it's
changes.
amazing, and I look at your historical knowledge. I mean, it's fascinating, and now you're. So I know you're having like a book signing. Is it this?
Yeah, so Sunday we have our open house. It's a launch party, if you will,
Okay.
for my new book coming out, Bargains of Fate. We're doing a bus tour first. 50 lucky people got tickets to that.
Okay.
And we'll be starting at my house, Selma. We're going to Chestnut Hill and to Rockland and Raspberry Plain and down to through Leesburg and then down to Belmont. And we're going to visit some of these old places where the scenes, the real life scenes. My historical fiction is based on true stories. I'm not clever enough to come up with them by myself. I mean, the facts, the real life truth is a lot stranger than what I can make up in my head.
Yeah.
And so we'll be doing that, and then we have that event afterwards out at Selma. So it's open if people want to come out. All you got to do is buy a book and
That's it.
come out and get it signed. Yeah, it's called Bargains of Fate. It's set between 1822 and 1826 here in Loudoun County. About a young lawyer who's in an impossible situation of trying to defend his cousin and brother-in-law. His cousin of killing his brother-in-law at Aldie Mill. But it's more than that too. He also finds himself in a dueling field. Two doctors kind of get into it in real life here, and they decide they're going to kill each other over a post-mortem done on a botched tracheotomy. I kid you not.
Wow.
They used a pipe stem to do a tracheotomy on some woman here.
Wow.
And
Wow.
she survived the tracheotomy, but she was able to breathe again, let's put it that way, but she didn't survive the pipe stem, I don't think.
Hey, so
it's interesting.
so you talk about lawyers. So your son is going to be going to law school.
That's right. He's going to University of Chicago in the fall.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yep. He wants to be a prosecutor.
That's good.
Maybe you'll have him here one day. I
Well,
don't
we
know.
always need good prosecutors. That's for
He's
sure.
young and he's enthusiastic. He's just got his MBA from Shenandoah University, and he's headed off to Chicago to law school, and then he'll come back and we'll see where he ends up. But I hear your son just graduated from law school.
He
as
did.
well.
He did. Yeah, he's got a job in the private sector. I think at some point though he wants to be a prosecutor. I think he likes
Maybe they
that.
can work together.
Maybe you
Ah,
never know.
You never know.
You never know. So you got so much going on, and I know you're involved in so many different properties, historical stuff, and all that kind of stuff. What's next aside from your book deal? What's next on the horizon for you here?
Well, we are right now. We're trying to finish these properties. We've got to get that done. I have a book series to write,
Right.
but we're doing more community outreach. We'll be, like I said, putting those grants out soon.
Right.
But I've been doing a lot of painting also. I have an art gallery downtown Leesburg.
Okay.
It's called The Ordinary Art. It's called The Ordinary because it used to be in a building that was an ordinary, which was a tavern or an inn.
Okay.
I have an art show coming up in Dallas, Texas,
Oh wow.
in September.
Okay.
And then I'm doing for Scripps Media through a number of their television stations in Richmond and in Norfolk and Baltimore and West Virginia and hopefully in Miami and Tampa. I do a program called Between the Lines, where we talk about some of the backstories behind not just my books, but in the publishing business. And we also talk about some of the great books that you can get that are being released that are coming out in the marketplace. And so I do this segment once a month on those media stations. I got to prepare for that. So there's a lot of work involved with that. So I get my own. I'm not doing a podcast yet. I haven't gone that far. That's just too much work for me. But I am doing a lot of stuff around those things.
Well, you have so much going on, and I appreciate you coming in. I'm glad we were able to corral you. If we get back into this
Well, if you
Western.
ever want to talk about some more sheriffs, I mean, I got some more sheriff stories. Plenty of those to go around.
Yeah, just so long as any of the stories you have about me are good.
You're all
I'm
good,
good with that.
right? Well, I mean, you have made a huge change to this county in terms of the way you broke the cycle.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like
Yeah.
you broke the cycle of what we had been doing in the past. In terms
Well, I think the
of
county was ready for a change.
more of an executive level.
I think I kind of hit it at the right time with my background and coming in here, and I think the time was right for this county because it's grown so fast. And you got a very it's a wealthy, highly educated county, and I think again it was the right time for me.
Well, the safety issues are the most important. I mean, you
Right.
can't have a thriving community if you don't feel safe in that community. You know, we talk about healthcare and education systems,
Right.
but you can't get educated through an education system. You can't get an education if you're not safe. If you're
Right.
getting if you have school shootings, if you have these kind of bad things that
Sure.
can happen. And I think that you've done a great job in, you know, keeping our crime rate low,
Right.
which is the biggest mark I
Right.
think of a successful sheriff. Right? I mean,
Well, we
keeping
have,
our crime rate under control.
but I look at that as, for me, it's the outreach that we have with the community. It's the engagement. It's knowing who, like, for example, even with these podcasts here, it's not only just interviewing. We have the two different versions. We got the Get to Know Your LCSO, where we talk about what we do on internally here, but also connecting with the outside community and people that are very active in the community, like yourself, that have stories to tell, that are kind of leading the way with many community outreach programs, different very positive things that are going on with the community. And I think all that connection is what makes a difference. And that it's not just what we do, it's not what I do, it's what our entire team does, but
Yeah.
it's also what the community does. It's keeping tight with the community and working and trying to get their stories out.
And that comes through leadership, though. I mean, you set that vision in terms of expectation, and then I had a very large company. A lot of people worked for me, and it's always about making sure that your people understand the expectation, and it's about whatever that mission is, right?
Right.
Our thing was always respect, integrity, and commitment to the mission,
Sure.
and excellence in all you do,
Right.
and that commitment to the mission of the community, right?
Right.
And understanding those things, what's important, and then asking yourself, what would Mike do in this situation? What would Mike expect me to do?
Right,
If
right,
your
right.
officers all feel that way and act that way, then
Right.
that's how you emulate. You expand your reach into
Right.
that community, and we see that with your officers. And listen, my boys were in high school not that long ago, and I've had a few incidents where we've had police show up at the house. There's some party going on, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know anything about it, and they have been wonderful to work with.
Right.
Doing the right thing by the parents, by the kids.
Right.
Not coming down with a hammer, but sometimes there's a way in which you can get across to kids and give a little grace and
Right.
and work with
Right.
folks. And I see that cooperation. I also think you guys get tough too. Taking no prisoners. I've spent some time in General District Court just for fun, background research in my books,
Yeah.
and it's amazing to me in terms of the number of folks that are doing stupid things because of alcohol and
Right,
drugs
sure.
and lack of employment. And we've got to reach those problems at their source. And that's what I think you're trying to do with some of these
Well,
outreach programs.
so
You cannot
you-
prosecute your way out of it, or police your way out of it.
So you have, I mean, certainly, clearly, a lot of executive leadership experience. You did phenomenal with your company there, and we talked about this earlier. So you have respect, integrity. What was your acronym?
Commitment to the mission
Commitment to the mission.
and excellence.
And
It was the
excellence,
Rice program.
okay.
We used to get Rice Krispies. It was just kind of a fun thing, but everybody get it,
No, but it's
yeah.
good because in mine when I ran, and it's still our mantra here today, is step up. Service, technology, efficiency, and professionalism, and we've never deviated from that. And it's just always it's goals that you never fully achieve, that you're always striving to achieve. And you're always trying to make it better next time out. So. But I got to tell you, I mean, this is fascinating. You got a tremendous background. I mean, I'm fascinated by it, especially when we talk about the history here of
Oh,
this
I love
county.
the history of
And
this county. The history of this county is so rich. Oh my God.
so I'm looking forward to. And so,
Oh, here's my concern though, is I keep writing these stories, and I'm on my 6th book. My 5th one is in the can. It'll be out in March, and I'm like, sooner or later they're going to think we're like the serial killer capital of the world, the murder capital of the world. I mean, like there's so many, incredible stories.
well, make
out
sure you
there.
keep that in the past.
They're
or
all in
don't-
the past.
yeah.
I don't do any current stuff. 19th century is my jam, but the early 20th century, there's some pretty interesting stories
I'll
there
bet,
too, right?
yeah.
Just based on
Yeah.
just what we've got out there in the archives. You just have to look.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for us to learn from it too.
Sure. Right.
It really is important
Right.
because if we don't learn from it, we know the old saying adage: you'll be destined to do it again, repeat the history again. And I think it's important for us to truly understand, what the past looked like, and so that we can improve going forward. This county was, a pretty small place for a long time. I remember we were going to the grocery store on Fridays, and my brother and I have a contest to see who could guess the next color car that passed on Route 15 from Luckett's to Leesburg. Think about that.
Yeah.
Just guess the next color car.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean,
No, it's crazy. It's growing like crazy.
it is
so.
growing like crazy. And it's a good thing.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. We got a great county.
If you're not
you know.
growing, you're dying.
No, that's right. Yeah, if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind.
That's
you
right.
know? So no, so I do appreciate you coming in, and I tell you, we could go on for hours
We
here.
could.
You know, so you have so much to talk about, so much to say, and I know you got a very busy schedule. So again, thank you for taking the time to
Thank
come
you
in
for
here,
having me
Sharon.
today.
Yeah, and just let's keep in touch, and anything you need out this way, just let me know.
I will. Thanks,
All
Mike.
right, thank you, Sharon.